How you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on Wednesday, May 22nd, halfway through the week, and another round of stories around the NFL to discuss on today's episode. We're going to start in Dallas once again, talking about the makeup of their wide receiver room. Do they have enough depth at the wide receiver position, even when CeeDee Lamb is there? Is there enough talent in that room to get the job done? Also, the typical divisional quarterback rankings. This time, we're switching over to the AFC, in the AFC North specifically, and ranking those quarterbacks, plus diving into the interesting topic about the NFL expanding maybe to play a game in Australia, potentially in 2025. That is up for debate and still very much in question, but it is a possibility, and we'll get to talk about that later on in the show. So remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I do start on the topics, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that, I can see your question pop up on my screen and read your question on air. That way, get your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics I have on store for you guys today. It's a massive help for the show, so if you would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. But that allows me to dive into the first segment right off the bat. The Cowboys. Do they have enough depth at their wide receiver position? The Cowboys began their OTAs officially yesterday, being Tuesday, and CeeDee Lamb wasn't present to start the practices, but it did give an opportunity for the media, for everybody else, the coaches and all of them running the practices, to get a better look at the Cowboys wide receiver room. Outside of CeeDee Lamb, it gets pretty bare in terms of options, reliable options. I should specify that the Dallas Cowboys have on hand. You look right away at the guy that stands out, Brandon Cooks. I guess he's the number 2 receiver. He has the most experience. He was used the most last year compared to their other options. But if you look at Brandon Cooks now, he's 30 years old right now and doesn't seem to have that same burst, that same level of threat that scares opposing defenses with that blazing speed that he used to have. He has slowed down a little bit, and also just coming off of last year, not his best performance. 54 receptions, 657 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. Both of the receptions and the yards were career lows for Brandon Cooks, and not to say that you were expecting him to just, hit a wall like he did at 30 years old, but it is logical to think that he'll begin to slow down once he hits the 30s and so on and so on. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that this sort of trend could continue, but at the end of the day, with Brandon Cooks, you have him at 30, sort of in a weird area right now, a gray area where maybe he gets a little bit better potentially, or he just continues to slowly digress as the years go on. But even so, outside of just the total numbers that he had to finish off the year, he had 10 games in which he played that he had fewer than 40 yards receiving. So a lot of up and downs and a lot of inconsistency with Brandon Cooks, and he's supposed to be your number 2 receiver. So if he's in an uncertain sort of level of play right now with the Dallas Cowboys, you have to look at other options, and specifically at wide receiver, you had Michael Gallup there, but he was released by the Cowboys and he ended up signing with the Las Vegas Raiders. So the Cowboys are really just left with a lot of young, unproven talent with Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, Cavante Turpin, and rookie Ryan Flournoy, who they drafted in the 6th round this year in 2024. You guys might not know a lot of those names unless you're a Cowboys fan, or some of you may really know realistically Jalen Tolbert. But any of the other names, it is hard to really pick them out as, I've heard of him before, because really they haven't had a lot of action. At least last year, Jalen Tolbert had the most action, or saw the most action in games, had 22 receiving yards, 268 yards, or I should have said 22 receptions, and then 2 touchdowns last year. You look at Turpin, also the next player that got the most looks, 12 receptions, 127 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then you look at another young player, Jalen Brooks, 6 receptions, 64 yards, no touchdowns, and only 7 games played for the Dallas Cowboys. So, not very confident in these other options right now based on what they've produced in 2023 and now heading into a massive year where it seems like, you hear all the all-in talks. Dak's on the last contract. Mike McCarthy's on the last year of his contract. There's a lot of uncertainty right now with all the major stars, and you're looking anywhere to try and get some confidence, some calmness around this team, but it is hard to do that when you have a lack of depth just in all these positions. But on that topic, on the wide receivers, their wide receiver coach, Robert Prince, made some comments on their wide receiver room and what their expectations are for these guys heading into 2024. He said, "We expect all of these guys to make a jump. It starts with Jalen Tolbert. He made a big jump from year 1 to year 2, and we expect that same thing for him going into year 3. And then Jalen Brooks, he works hard, and he's one of those guys that's always studying, and he can play all of the wide receiver positions. So we're looking forward to seeing what he can do this year as well." They expect a lot out of these two guys. They expect them to make a jump. I'll give my comments on Coach Robert Prince's comments in just a few seconds, but you look around the offense, trying to find anybody else that you can rely on, and that's where you get to the tight ends. Jake Ferguson actually had a very impressive year last year for sort of breaking out in his early stage of his career. He finished with 71 receptions, 761 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So you look at him, it looks promising. He has a pretty high ceiling for a young tight end. The Dallas Cowboys could use him a bit more, but in terms of expecting a massive jump, can you really, with a serious face, say that Jake Ferguson is going to give you the level of production that you would need from a tight end to get where you want to get at the end of the year? That's in question. I don't know if a lot of people can say that with the utmost confidence. And then comparing him to CeeDee Lamb, who obviously had the best year of his career last year. He is an all-world receiver, one of the top receivers in the NFL. He was the only receiving option that got over the 1,000-yard mark on the Dallas Cowboys roster. Jake Ferguson was the closest one, and he was still about 300 or so yards away from that, and he's the tight end. So the main question is the wide receiver position, and going back to what Coach Prince said, mentioning the jump, Jalen Tolbert, he wants to see the jump from year 2 to year 3, and also Jalen Brooks as well. They're expecting a jump. What do you mean by jump? What do you specifically mean by you want to see a jump from them? Well, a jump could certainly mean for Jalen Tolbert, he finished with 268 yards. A realistic jump for me is probably getting close to 700, maybe 800 yards at best if he hits the ground running right off the bat and he's looking like a lot of a different receiver. That's something you can look towards more with him. Turpin as well was used a bit more, but not targeted as much. With all these other options, to expect a big jump out of them, it is hard for me to believe that, just because you look at the quarterback and what sort of connection you have with him. Based on the stats and the amount of receptions these guys got and the amount of targets that Dak threw their way, it is hard to expect such a massive jump when Dak Prescott is almost unfamiliar with these guys by not targeting them that much in the year previous to this one coming up. So how do you expect Dak to now feed him a lot more targets to, produce that sort of jump that you'd expect out of these guys to really be a contender in the NFC? And that's really my next point, because, they always talk about the salary cap issues. That's the main problem. They can't go out and sign any other players because they are so handicapped by the salary cap. But it is hard to mention now how the wide receiver is lacking in depth. Then you look at the running backs, who a lot of the times people would say that the running game, if you have a very solid running game, it could open up the pass game, right? Well, they don't have a lot of depth there either. So if the run game is struggling, then you have to look at the passing game to sort of open up this offense a little bit more. Now you have defenses playing off the run a little bit, playing further back off of their receivers, and it becomes that much harder to really get anything going on offense because you don't really know what you have in these guys. Zeke comes back. Is he the same sort of player? What kind of production can you expect from him? And then it's just hard to see it all play into fruition, and having the expectations that the Cowboys can sort of get back to where they were last year, even making the playoffs seems at this moment, it might be a hot take, it might not be. It seems a lot foggier than it did in previous years because of all the uncertainty everywhere. The Cowboys haven't done the best of job of building up this roster through the draft, through free agency. They've taken too long to extend their players and really create any sort of cap space. And because of that, you get to this point where everything is sort of crumbling right now. You have a million things to worry about, and the depth of your roster is really suffering from it. It's not an ideal situation, but of course the Cowboys will paint it in a positive light. But depending on how this all plays out, maybe they address it later on, maybe they don't. It will be interesting to see how they start the regular season. If CeeDee Lamb gets a contract, maybe he doesn't, maybe he holds out. And then you really have to depend on these guys, where I'm not sure the Cowboys are really focusing in on really targeting these guys in 2024 to expect that massive jump. I don't think it's fair for these guys to have these expectations on their shoulders, but that is what the situation has come to for the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of question marks around it, where the Dallas Cowboys will finish and how they'll play out this year, Dak's potential final year. It all has to do with one another. We'll see how that all plays out. But for right now, it doesn't look great, honestly, for the Dallas Cowboys, but we will leave it at that. And in the meantime, we will head to the first break of the show. When we come back, I'll give you guys my AFC North quarterback rankings, plus looking ahead to potentially 2025, where the NFL could potentially be playing another international game, this time in a new country. Stick around to find out where that would be. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.